So I'm a software engineer and also a Scrum Master, kind of half and half of each role. So that's all for a quick introduction before we jump in. The goal for today's training, to put quite simply, is to enable members to contribute to the growth and prosperity of their organization as one of the members that shoulders Mercari's future. In 2017, one thing I was told by the CTO at the time when I was working here as an intern, I was told to really, well, I was told about how I should be approaching my work. And I thought what the CTO meant was, well, just achieve good results, create good things for the company. So often what happened is something that I thought was really important might not be the case for the customer. You have to think of what is really important to the customer. And at the same time, it's important to contribute to strengthening the organization. Thus, providing value to the customers, of course, will lead to more profit, will lead to growth for the company. But it's important for us to contribute even beyond that in our roles. Thus, I think that is really the major goal here we have to keep in mind. The Mercari development process, another thing is to really understand that as a goal for today. But I think it's also important to understand what is the responsibility of all the different stakeholders in the process. To be completely honest, I think after we're assigned to our teams, we'll have specific development tasks we're working on. But often there are many different things we're taking on at the same time. So why are we working on this specific task? What is our range of responsibility? Having a really clear understanding of that will enable us to know where are the issues and what do we need to be solving. To give a kind of worse or not so ideal approach is to basically work in a way that can end up tiring out everybody around you. But really, that's not what we want to be doing here. Instead, we need to think about what is really required for this overall process. One thing is understanding, why are we doing what we are doing? Why is this necessary? And what is the responsibility of all of the stakeholders around you? Let's move on for now. Lots of content to get through for today. One thing that will not be included in the goal for today is how to handle best practices in individual development processes. I think a team is really a living organism. But what's important is what ends up actually happening within that team. And it's important that everybody is really on the same page about what is important. We'll have time for questions later. Maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A section, but tools and these more individual development topics are on the slides, so I won't really be talking about them directly in today's session. All right, so we are short on time, so let's keep moving through the content. I think many of you have worked here as interns, so you're aware that we use the Scrum framework. So Scrum is a form of Agile software development, and the framework here is to implement that approach to development. I think many know of it as it's quite famous, having dialogue with individuals instead of just processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. So of course, the left of the longer development process is important, but more so than that, it's about looking at what really lies on the right of this long chain of development. Scrum is in place to implement this process. Again, why do we adopt a Scrum framework? We switched to Scrum about 3 to 4 years ago at Mercari, and the way I would answer this is that it enables us to continue to provide value to our users while also solving complex issues. There is a single definition to Scrum. Essentially, it's a light framework for people, teams, and organizations to create value through the application of appropriate solutions for complex issues. This isn't really the clearest definition, so I'll be breaking this down a bit. First, let's look at what we mean by complex issues. Complex issues refers to fundamentally uncertain and unpredictable things, meaning we don't know what the answer will look like, what the solution might look like. This is just one way you could look at it from all the different documentation there is about it. If you look on the bottom right, there's the requirements on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we have technology. This looks at, is it in a known area? Is it in an unknown area? Scrum looks at really the central part of this larger graph. As you can see here, there are so many different variables that contribute to the situation. So you want to be able to really predict them and then see how accurate they end up being. That's essentially why we use Scrum. Again, so if you know all the variables, it's pretty easy, but that's not something we know at the beginning of the process. We talked a bit about complex issues, but a lot of this depends on our experience. So taking on complex issues based on your experience. Simply put is what you see here, that you can develop more knowledge through experience, and decision-making can be based on observation. It's essentially this concept of lean thinking and taking this approach to continue to maximize value. There's also this concept of rationalism, which I think covers why we use Scrum. Thus, let's say if you want to install something, or if you look at the different variables there are, the idea is to be able to organize all this just within your own thought process to determine which steps to take next. You can see here this concept of waterfall, which is one method of development where, in this case, you would essentially have all the aspects known, all the aspects decided, and then use that to move on with development. But Scrum isn't implemented just for the sake of doing Scrum. Rather, the idea is that it has to be adjusted to the situation. That's if you know everything already, then you can take a waterfall approach. It's important to be flexible. This here you can see in bold, appropriate solutions is a really key concept here. So what do we mean when we say appropriate? The idea is to look at how can we adapt to things. First, we have a current state of the team. We have a goal for the team, a target for the team. The idea is to adapt in order to fill this gap. This goes back to the idea of building more knowledge based on experience. In doing so, to bridge this gap between our current status and our target. Thus, we need to be able to adapt to serve this purpose of Scrum. So how do we really adapt? It's actually quite simple. The idea is to look at what is the target? Is this really clear? And then we want to look at where are we in this longer process? If this current status, where we are right now, is clear, then it's quite easy to move forward. It's important to always be clear of how big this gap is in order to be able to adapt, to continue to adapt. So then how do we actually develop this clarity on our current situation? This is the concept of transparency and having all the information you need collected in one single place that can make it clear what next actions to take. So let's say we have a goal in mind and the information that we need for that, let's say it's disorganized in all different places. Well, that will make it possible to make decisions. That will make it difficult to really keep things transparent. If the information is organized in that way for a specific purpose, that's fine. But if that's done really unintentionally, then it doesn't serve the purpose here. So we talked before about being able to adapt. And the idea is we have to adapt in order to continue to bridge this gap. And keeping things transparent is one way in order to ensure that we are really clear on what this gap is. Here you can see the 3 pillars of Scrum. This might not come up much in general Scrum training, but basically, we usually will talk about planning, daily Scrum, but ultimately, those parts of the process are there to ensure these pillars. So if you can ensure you're meeting these 3 pillars, then you can really be flexible and adjust how you actually go about the Scrum process. So these 3 pillars here, I think, really the core things you want to always be keeping in mind. So moving on here, in Scrum, there are essentially 4 rules. I think everybody has worked here as an intern, so you've already experienced this, but we have the product owner who will make the product backlog and then communicate what is needed when the team meets for planning. I know some teams do this, some teams might not do this, but generally we'll break that down into tasks and have a sprint backlog to ensure transparency within the team. And the Scrum Master will run the daily stand-up to move forward with development. And once development has been completed, then we have a sprint review, and after that, we have a final retrospective. Interpreter switch.
So I don't want to take too much time on this, so I'd like to move on to the rules for these specific areas. There's not much to talk about for time. For scrums, we use sprints to define our development process. And that period of time is just called a sprint. So there's time just indicates a defined period. Generally speaking, it's between 1 week and 1 month, and it's generally fixed. So what I was talking about before, all of those items happen within a sprint. And depending on the period, the time for the event may vary. Let's say your team has 1 week sprint, so the planning and review period or cycle also might be shorter. However, you may have daily scrum every day. That's 10 minutes and that doesn't usually change, but you can see that the time for each event varies according to the grade. Also, the grade of the potential risk that the prediction will fail. So if you're doing it in 1 week, then the goal is also for that week. So I think your prediction for a 1 week period might not fail, but if you think about it for a month, how accurately can you predict what's going to happen in 1 month? I think it's a little bit more difficult. It's almost impossible. So the shorter it is, the better or more accurate your prediction will become. Of course, it's not the end goal to be able to predict everything, but without prediction, you're not able to fill that gap. Because if your goal is a little out out there, then it's difficult to even reach that goal. So the shorter generally is better. Regarding events, as I mentioned the cycle earlier, there's planning, there's delivery, the retrospective. So what is in this entire process? There's inspection as well as adaptation, and the cycle is pretty much to do that. For example, for planning, what can you do within that sprint period? What do we want to deliver? The team discusses that, and then finally, in order to do that, the team uh, finalizes a goal. So you're making the goal or where you're trying to head very transparent and clear. And if you know where the team is at, then you can fill that gap by moving towards that goal. And in terms of your current status, if you decide what you're going to commit, what time, what events you're going to commit, then that will also make it very clear what the process is to get to that goal, and you will be able to inspect your progress. So daily stand-up is the same concept. So there's a template, and you may ask, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? And this is what I'm having issues with. I think there are teams that talk about things in that manner. But essentially, the purpose of this is to make clear what gap there is between you and the goal or the team and the goal. And it's not that important that you maintain that structure as long as you're able to do that. As long as you know what the issues are, what the obstacles are in order to get to your goal, and it's that inspection process that's happening at stand up. So the routine is important only when it's actually able to help with accomplishing the goal. I think in the beginning, maybe sometimes you feel that the daily stand up is not necessary. I think in one of my teams, we've ended up getting rid of the stand up, but if it's purposeful, if it helps the team, then you should do it. If it feels unnecessary, then I think it's important to propose things saying, uh, I'd like to get rid of it because of this, this, this. But I think feeling that a meeting is unnecessary to begin with, you want to improve on the meeting itself. But you want to make it clear what the goal is, and taking that into consideration or that output and that product goal within our company, that might be OKRs or our roadmap. But what we're creating right now, does it meet our expectations of what the goal, ultimate goal is, and inspecting that gap? And according to that inspection, if you're unable to reach the goal within a timely manner, you might need to change your schedule, add additional work. That's what you would do during the review. And if you're not able to do this within the review, then there's no point of the review itself. And so it's important to think of why it's not serving a purpose and then improve upon it. But unfortunately, when you're part of that cycle, sometimes it's difficult to realize things because it's sort of a part of an unconscious process. Maybe the team is unable to recognize why you're doing what you're doing or why certain meetings have a certain purpose. So perhaps what you're doing, other teams may not be able to recognize why it's important, but you are very aware of it. And so if there are areas for improvement or room for improvement, it's each and every person's responsibility to take ownership of that and try to make changes. I don't think I need to go into depth regarding artifacts, but an artifact is a job, basically, that ensures transparency. If it's backlog, then it's a list of items necessary to achieving a goal, and this is arranged according to priority. And so basically, it ensures transparency for providing value. I think certain teams have sprint backlogs, some don't. But within your sprint goal, the product backlog items that are selected in order to achieve your sprint goals is the sprint backlog. And then within the sprint backlog, you essentially create that plan for execution. And this is a plan mainly for developers. So it's not really about the PO or the Scrum master, but the developers need to visualize what they need in order to achieve their goal. And as long as it's visualized, there's no, it should be fine. Increments is the general name given to units to quantify the results provided to achieve a goal. However, what's important here is in creating a feature, I think there are some things that need to be absolutely ensured. For example, let's say you're making some sort of snack. If it's not safe or the quality isn't high, then our users won't eat the snack. They won't buy the snack. And it's also important that there's a criteria in which you can judge the value of the item that you created in order to do that gap analysis. And so, of course, there is a goal. But there also needs to be a criteria line for which to base your judgment of the item. Or let's say you're creating some sort of feature or function, and that's fine. But let's say for Mercari, we use SLO, or there may be standards within each team, like quality control standards. And I think to begin with, it's important that bare minimum we meet those standards. And of course, that's different for each team. But some teams work on both at the same time. So let's say you wanted to make a shortcake. In most teams, within the backlog, there's probably components. Let's see, like the whipped cream. But for example, are you able to check the quality? Let's say you're trying to provide a shortcake, but if you're just showed the whipped cream, are you really able to measure its quality? Who add value for and for what? You will need to make sure you're meeting those standards. If we're talking about features, let's say we made a backend feature, but what sort of output or what value does it provide and for who? So not only did you make a feature, but let's say it's deployed or QA'd. That's okay if it's, maintaining a certain level of quality for our users, then that's fine. But if you just made it for the sake of making it, then there's no point. So that's the basic understanding. This is the part that I'd like to take the most time on. But within the development process, there are members who are in charge of developers. And so I want to talk about the roles within a team. At minimum, there should be a product owner, developers, and then Scrum masters. So this is focusing on development. So I'm just going to leave EMs and those other roles aside. But in terms of developing something, these are the basic roles. And I think it's important to understand what each person is in charge of. Within the company, we call them product managers. It's the same thing as product owner. But the product owner is in charge of maximizing the ROI of the team. Developers, on the other hand, are in charge of maximizing the outcome of the team. So technically, this is about increasing or maximizing productivity of the team. But what I'd like to say here is it's not just productivity, but essentially we want them to focus on maximizing the outcome. So for the Scrum Master, when there's something that the team wants to achieve, the Scrum Masters is in charge of maximizing that feasibility or the feasibility of the team's objectives. So this is quite abstract. So I'd like to break this down and discuss each one. So first, from product owner. So here it says maximizing ROI, return on investment. So let's say there's a cost, people that could be manpower, materials, time. But essentially, in order to execute a certain hypothesis, we want there's a cost involved, but we want to maximize the return that we receive for that cost. And since if you're working for a for-profit organization, or if this is part of a for-profit organization, ultimately that return needs to bring monetary profit. This is also an abstract concept, but when you start an initiative, what is the timeline and how much impact is it going to create? And so there are a lot of things that can be maximized within a short period or in the mid to long term period. But within that, it's important for there to be maximum return in terms of costs. And so the product owner, needs to decide or understand what sort of impact there is within which timeline and make sure that they uh, share a shared purpose or goal as well as a clear vision for a team. You might be a developer as well as a product owner. So this is something I'd like for you to understand. But when there are times you feel stress over, is there even a purpose for this? Why are we even doing this? If that's the case, that means the product owner is not able to share that message or share the value of the project with those who are involved. The most important thing for the product owner to do is to communicate that message and make sure it's efficient as well as everybody understands why it's necessary. So we're going to do XYZ with this backlog. That part, it doesn't really matter as much as sharing this message and saying that this team is going to work on this and is going to win or create this maximized return through these projects or through these tasks is what's the important thing. And do you want to follow somebody, a product owner, who is not strategic with their goals and planning? I think the answer is no, in the sense that you want somebody who is able to understand what is happening within the company. So this might be an external team, it might be with an internal team that you're working with. But let's say it's just how developers' time is used. But of course, we need to always negotiate how that works with the product owners. And of course, there's no point in requesting to start a project that cannot be developed. And so the product owner is supposed to think of all of these things. So that's it for product owner. I think developer is the most important. I'd like to spend time here. But first, I wrote here to maximize outcome. But this is what I like to talk about here. So here it says productivity and outcome. When you think about it in the literal sense, it's the verb produce with ivity, which means the quality or tendency. And so that essentially indicates the degree to which you're able to produce something. And so how much output is there, how effective your output is and how it's produced. And even if the output is high, it's not helpful or doesn't have any meaning if the user doesn't benefit from it. And so in order to maximize productivity, we're not just trying to maximize the output per se. And so I've added productivity in the larger sense here too. So when we think about it from the product perspective, once something is provided to the user as value, the theory here is that we want to make sure that it actually is worth something for our users and our users accept it. So in a larger sense, you want to create recognizable value, and it's an indicator of how much users recognize the value of the product when they use it. And so how much they use it and how much they recognize its value is important here. So when you think of product goals, we want to make sure that you're maximizing the value and the output towards those goals. And so that is the most important for a developer. Interpreter switch.
Another thing that we hear a lot is, okay, so we can get to this part, right? Create a lot of output. But will that actually lead to significant outcome? That's a perspective we always need to be keeping as a developer. Sure, it's good to be able to create a lot of output, but if you're just creating all kinds of meaningless output, then it's a big waste of time. You should probably just take the day off and play video games instead or something, if that's all you're doing. So if the output is significant, but the outcome is quite small, then that means there's quite a lot of wasted resources there, which will just lead to more and more debt and is quite meaningless. On the other hand, let's say that the output is quite small, but the outcome is very significant. Then ultimately what we're doing in these kinds of situations is being able to solve all different issues from just one single initiative. This means we are committing to an outcome, and that's fine, that's ideal. So we don't want to just aim for maximum output, we want to aim to actually create a significant outcome. It's all kind of summarized here. So we're trying to maximize outcome, not just create more and more output. This will be improved by having better output, but we don't want to just increase our output and expect that to automatically lead to greater outcomes. So product managers, EMs, are all different kinds of leadership roles. And the idea is to not just take that vision and do exactly what's written there and nothing else. Another way I could say is we're not just slaves to the tasks we are given. We have a goal and we have a clear need. When this has been shared with you, you don't want to just go forward with it without any sort of additional thought. Rather, you want to bring your perspective as a developer and think about what you can do to really lead to the maximum outcome. It's important to really negotiate that with the product owner in order to really take that effort to maximize the outcome. That's the larger concept here. Again, so when we look at the outcome, we want to really ask ourselves, how much value is this actually bringing to our users? And we want to think about how can we really reach that? I know feature flags is maybe one approach to this. I think if you haven't heard of this already, you probably will, where you can use feature flags to measure the outcome and create a plan for when you're actually rolling something out. Again, output is not the most important thing. The outcome after that is more important. You always need to be keeping in mind if you're really leading to significant outcome. If you make something that's meaningless and nobody will use, then it just leads to more technical debt. Last, I'd like to touch on this concept of Scrum Master. I'm not sure how much everybody here is interested in this idea, but Scrum Master, the role essentially is sometimes taken on by developers as an additional responsibility. As you can see here on the slide, the Scrum Master's job is not to just force everybody to use the Scrum framework. Let's see, to give an example, it's not the job of the Scrum Master to say, this isn't the right way to do stand-up, this isn't the right way to do Scrum planning or sprint planning. Rather, it's important to look at the team and to think about how we improve the quality of what the team is doing and create a good habit, a good set of daily habits that will lead to a better team. And think about how to approach work that will make it easier to achieve these goals. The product owner, developers really do contribute to this process directly, whereas the Scrum Master is tasked more with directly changing the approach of the team and changing the habits of the team. That's what I would say is really most important. Thus, it's important to really look at what is actually most important and foresee what direction the team is going in, and as necessary, come in with proposals for changes that the team might be able to make. Thus, what is actually needed to maximize the feasibility of the Scrum team's objectives? Essentially, is to ensure, let's say, just to give an example, say the product owner doesn't have any really direct ownership over the team, then basically you would just be developing the exact tasks you've been giving. All you're doing is just developing what the project owner said to develop. Then that doesn't really lead to lead to more output, to more outcomes, to maximizing outcomes. So really taking on this ownership, this responsibility is something we also need to commit to as developers. Let's say two developers are arguing, they come to some sort of a disagreement. Who should the product owner be siding with? Who should they be listening to more? So I've had this experience myself, and there's really no point to that. So basically what you will want to do in this situation is observe what's happening and say to the members, is this kind of situation enabling you to achieve your goal? The responsibility that each member has is something they have to be committing to at the end of the day. You're not necessarily saying, okay, it's important to just be neutral, it's important to take one side. That's not really the point. Rather, it's ensuring that everybody is in a position to achieve their responsibility. At the end of the day, the goal is to make the best possible thing as a team, to create the best possible thing as a team. That requires ensuring that you are positively influencing the team, but also in order to create a strong organization, you have to take this more broad perspective. Ultimately then, the role of the Scrum Master is to look indirectly at the activities of the team and bring in ideas that can enable the team to achieve their goals. That is what I would say is really the core responsibility. To summarize, Scrum is in place to solve complex issues. And as I shared before, this refers to problems that have a lot of uncertainty. In that sense, experience is important to continue to develop understanding as well as transparency. That requires really properly defining roles and events that cover these requirements. If that's unclear, then that needs to be improved. It's also crucial that teams understand the different roles and responsibilities. And if that isn't clear, it's important to engage in further dialogue to ensure really everybody is on the same page about the responsibility and how to ensure we're all in a place where we can fulfill those responsibilities.